I love the conversation we have because, even though we're facing camera, we have audience, and you have been, to me, standing out in a way that always talk about the biblical worldview, always give me the answer that I never expect, the same answer, biblical worldview, for 20 years, right? How you came from a background not prepared for biblical worldview. You had the Lincoln Christian University, you learned, of course, but there must be something in your personal experience, whether it's study, whether personal, you see something that many other people don't see. Mm-hmm. Where did that come from? How is that formed you? I always want to ask that question. There must be something made you who you are that is so strongly sharing and discussing what's happening in people's life in church.
Right. Sometimes I think I'm too philosophical. That was real philosophical. I'm not used to the philosophy coming this way. We have talked about this before, and I might give the same answer today, and I can't remember how I answered it before, but looking back, I was born in Chicago, family of 7 children. My mom and dad were hardworking people. My father was a tool and die maker, worked in the factory, and in fact, I was cleaning out our shed this week, and we like stories. So I'm going to tell this in a story. And I found his toolbox that he had given to me. And it's very, very unique. It's about, that big. And
want you to know how to live a life.
Yes. And he had 2 toolboxes, okay? And all of his tools that he used in his job were his personal tools in the toolbox. And it dawned on me that from those little toolboxes and what he had learned in high school, okay, he went to the same school that Pastor Washington went to, number of years apart, the same school, Tilden Tech on the south side of Chicago. He learned the trade of tool and die making, and some of the work that he did is still around today and used. I cried a little bit when I saw the toolbox, and it dawned on me that between what he had in his head that he learned from high school, what he had in the tools that were in the box and the skills with his hand, and with his passion in his heart to take care of his wife and 7 children, put a roof over the head, and provided all of us with a Catholic education. He did all that out of that little toolbox. Wow. It was those tools, okay, that put the food on the table and paid for the college education, glasses when we needed them, and dental work when we needed, and when I broke my arm in the hospital. And he did all that with some things.
So what are he making?
He makes machines, big machines. He worked at American Can, and so can keep repairing the machines and keeping the machines going, and big factory machines. And
so he is a mechanic.
A mechanic. And my father, wasn't a very churchy guy, okay? He went to church once in a while, wedding, funeral, First Holy Communion kind of thing. My mother was the one that was very religious in the family. And she died when I was 12. She got sick when I was 7 and had breast cancer. And so it was my father that finished raising me. And part of it for me was, after having lost my mother, early on in life, I had to say, what is life really all about? You can die as a young person, you could survive as my father. He lived to be 88. Wondering, is there a resurrection? We were taught that going to a Catholic school. And then, going off to college and somewhat getting into the hippie drinking scene, and that was empty, that went nowhere. And somebody invited me to, a Bible study, and I went to a Bible study, and I kept asking questions. And in fact, a good friend of ours, Dean Ross, who's been to China with us twice, he was preaching one Sunday, and it was new, and I didn't know the difference between class and a preaching service. And in the middle of the preaching service, I raised my hand. I stopped the sermon when I raised my hand. He never had anybody raise a hand in the middle of it because I had a question. And so it was always, why? How come? Because what, I was always pursuing, and I wanted to know more. I wanted to know more. And St. Augustine says that inside every human being is a vacuum, and it has the shape of God. And no matter what we try to put in there, it's not going to fit. Okay? Only God can fill that part. And I was looking for how is that filled? And so as I thought about it, it was kind of like an Eastern mysticism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and other isms from the East. It's kind of like, well, just imagine all the suffering going away. Do yoga and make it disappear. And I thought, well, it's not the world I live in. I live in the world of flesh and blood. When I cut myself, I bleed. And, that doesn't account for this world. And always looking for what fits. And I started in this Bible study, and I thought, well, if this is true, I need to know more. And I wanted to push it to the end, to the very end, to determine, is this what the Bible says about reality? Is it just religious, okay? Light the candle, say the prayers, and it doesn't matter whether it's Catholic or Protestant or Eastern Orthodox or Coptic or, if it's just a matter of spending time doing something holy or signing the cross or any of these things, what does all this mean? What does all this mean? Is it true?
Wow,
because if it's not true, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
There's other things I can be spending. And so I did.
That is something I ask myself many years.
Is it true? Yeah.
It is true.
Yeah.
If
it's not true, I'm gone. I'm gone.
Right.
And there are even times I'll try to persuade myself that it isn't true. Because there are things I'd like to do in life that I don't do. I hold myself back because they're sin. But sometimes that feels good. I mean, sin wouldn't be tempting if it didn't feel good. Okay? But I'll think it through and I'll go, no, this is true, and I need to stay steadfast with the truth. Okay? And even in small things, people say, oh, truth doesn't exist. Okay, right and wrong doesn't exist. Well, walk up and steal their cell phone, and you'll find out right away whether they believe whether right and wrong exists. Okay, or if you deposit $1,000 in the checking account, and your statement, the teller gives you a receipt that says 900. Tell me truth doesn't exist. Everybody acts like truth. Everybody acts like truth exists. As what Christian preacher said, he was from the East and a Christian, and there was a philosopher, psychologist from the West, and he became Eastern, and this Eastern guy says Easternism doesn't work, and the college professor said, well, Easterners have a different form of logic and they have a deeper truth. And he goes, no, they don't. Because when they get ready to cross the street, they look both ways. So don't tell me that Easterners have a different sense of logic. They have a different type of deception, but in terms of a sense of logic, they have the same logic as every human being. We see, we hear, we taste, we touch, we feel. And, this pole is either here or it's not. Okay? And I don't want anybody, doing a Jedi mind trick saying, this is not the pole you're looking for. I don't want anybody messing with my brain. Okay? And so my pursuit for truth and what's real and what's important, because you know what? If it is true that there's a God that spoke and the universe was created, and in the middle of that universe he had a planet, that there were creatures that he made in his image and his likeness. He made them for eternity, and in spite of our sin and turning against him, he still loves us, and he loves us to the point He gave his only begotten Son so that our sins would be dealt with, okay? Because everybody has a conscience. Even bad guys have a conscience. Because of the death on the cross and the resurrection of Christ, that tells me that this feeling in me that death is not the end. And that I'm going to see people that I love again. And that death was not the end for them as well. Right. This makes sense. Right. So for me, it's not a matter of just going and dipping my hand in the holy water. And it doesn't matter. Things that people do religiously, for the most part, are empty and not important, okay? Because in the end, it's God that fixes the broken me. It's Jesus that fixes the broken you, you know? And that's the real religion. He religaments us. He puts us back together. Right. And then so for me, worldview is a passion, and I'm excited about it. And I talk to anybody that if I think that they're not going to listen, I try a little bit. If I'm not getting anywhere, I'll try a little more. And after a while, you know, you just say, now might not be the right time, okay?
Yeah, I'm glad, very glad that, you know, we talk about this today, because I always want to ask a question is, what kind of experience made you, you know, so passionate and strong about the biblical worldview? And I think today, at least at one particular point, we go deeper.
we go deeper. I may have told you this one story. There's a friend of mine, and he was a Hindu, okay? And he spent high school summers and college summers over in India and learning the chants and the yoga and the meditation. And this brother I love, okay? And we were out hiking one time, and he said, well, you are open-minded enough to believe that when we die, we all go to the same place. Well, my first thought was that coming from a Hindu, that places don't exist because everything's an illusion. I thought it was an odd question, which meant that he was kind of inconsistent in his thinking. But I didn't want to debate that point at the right there at that moment. Or I responded, I said, yes, I do. And I kept hiking, you know, further up the trail, and he was behind me, and he shouted, and he said, well, and he stopped, and I stopped, and I said, well, what? And he says, well, where do we all go if we're all going to the same place? And I said, straight to the judgment seat of Jesus.
Wow.
And he got angry. But a couple years later, he called me on the phone, and it dawned on him that the Eastern mystic worldview could not account for evil. And if you can't account for evil, you can't account for right and wrong. If you can't account for right and wrong, you can't account for justice. And if you can't account for justice, then what's this thing inside every single one of us that wants it? Okay? And he began to reason that worldview did not have a category for dealing with evil. In fact, it fostered evil because of the yin and the yang, and and that whole thing. Right. It's a matter of, okay, if I do something good, then you've got to do something bad in order for it to get into balance. So and if I do bad, then you got to go out and do good. And so that worldview, it just fostered evil, and there was no resolution of evil. So children get raped, people are sold into sex slavery, there is racial discrimination in many parts of the world, including the United States. I just heard yesterday, a friend of mine, his son was murdered, okay? Inside of us is this cry for justice. And I asked, like I ask all the other questions, well, where'd that come from? Why is that? I was probably the little kid when I was little. My mom would say, go sweep the floor, and I'd say, why? How come? Well, because I said so. Well, why? How come? But the biblical worldview can resolve it. So the friend came back, and we talked, And a couple days later, he confesses Jesus as Lord. He's baptized for the forgiveness of his sins. And he became a very, very devout Christian, basically because I told the truth. He knew I was a Christian. He knew I was a pastor. He knew that I loved Jesus. He died a couple years ago, died of a heart attack. It had nothing to do with it. And this is a brother that I loved. I miss him terribly. But when he asked the question, well, where do we all go? I told him straight to the judgment seat of Jesus, and because it's true. And it's true because Jesus loved us in such a way that he came and he took my sin, he nailed it to the cross, I bear it no more, I am a free man, okay? Because of his great love, I have been set free. Because of his great love, you've been set free. I cannot say that that's not true. I have to say it's true, regardless of whether people accept it or not. So I'm passionate about the biblical worldview, because if the materialists are right, Jesus is just another human being crucified by the Romans.
So can we say biblical worldview is really thinking philosophically through the biblical truth? Can we say that?
Yeah, it does. But I want to go ahead and I want to talk a little bit about that word philosophy. Okay. First of all, everybody has a view of God, whether he exists, he doesn't exist. If he does exist, is he a force? Is he a person? Everybody has a view of God. So everybody's a theologian. Everybody's a philosopher. Everybody's a politician, because everybody thinks it and has a position. Okay. Right. And so when we say philosophically, yes, that's true, but I don't want it to be so brainy that people go, I can't get that. I'm going to walk away from that. Right. Truth is, everybody has a philosophy, and so some people pay attention to it more to look for consistencies, because I don't want to live a lie. Life is too short. Even if I were a materialist, life is too short to live a lie from where I'm sitting. But at the same time, so many materialists, they don't care whether they lie or not, because this is all there is. And so they don't care about propagating lies. And then, as Nancy Pearcey says, even materialists, naturalists, they have a map of the world. Well, they can go do science during the daytime and have a totalitarian government. But if their child dies of a disease, their heart breaks and cries, but the materialistic world doesn't have a category for dealing with that. And as Nancy Pearcey says, that their map is too small. If they're crying for a dead child, they have to reach out to a worldview, a Christian worldview, that says that there is a God, and that baby was made in the image and likeness of God, and that baby had value not only to us while it was alive, but also to God, that every time a human tear is shed, that's a testimony to the fact that the world as it is now is not the way it's supposed to be. It was not intended, and we all have that desire for it to be something other than this, so that there is no more crying, there is no more sorrow, that there is no more grief. And Jesus deals with that. If there was another religion in the world that dealt with it, I would consider it. But because I've considered them, so many of them, thinking that, okay, is there an alternative? One of the things that really gets my temper up, I'm driving down the street and I see a car bumper sticker on blue and it says coexist. And it has all the different religions all on one bumper sticker. And, somehow they think that, okay, well, I can make the idea that they all coexist. Well, what you just did is you basically said none of them have any value in terms of truth claims, and it's a matter of honor them for what they say, love them for who they are, and talk it through so that you can come to the conclusion as to the fact that there is a God that has created us and loved us. And many people come to God, different ways. We had a friend of ours, and you've met him, John Baumgartner, scientist up in Los Alamos, and he had a friend over in the Soviet Union, twice won the Lenin-Komsomol Award, atheistic scientist, and it was his job. I don't know the biochemistry here real well, but I'm going to repeat it the best that I can. the hemoglobin of the human being and the hemoglobin of a chimpanzee are mirror images, with the exception of there's an iron molecule that has to move. Now, I'm just repeating this from 30 years ago being explained to me, and it was the scientist's job to take the chimpanzee molecule and to move it over so that it would be just like the human hemoglobin, so that they could prove evolution. And after thousands of tries, he couldn't get it. And he's looking down the electron microscope, and all of a sudden he says, maybe it never moved. Maybe God does exist. And that was, nobody gave him a tract. Nobody said, are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Or nobody said, come to my church. He looked at God's creation with a question that he had, and the answer was, maybe it didn't happen in the first place. And that question got into his mind where he thought. And after he thought about it and he listened to the gospel, then it went down to his heart where we make our decisions, and he changed his behavior and his course in life from atheism to Christian, from evolutionist to creationist, because he couldn't make an iron molecule move from one part of a hemoglobin to another. And he tried to disprove Christianity, and no matter what he did, he couldn't do it. And so he embraced Jesus as Lord.
I love this conversation today because we started with the youth generation, younger generation, the church, but ended with go deeper with your personal experience and find out your journey. And that's the question I always ask myself. What is Bill Redmond so different? What experience made him so strong and passionate about biblical worldview? Our conversation today really touched that important, the questions I have.
Right.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
I really appreciate it.
Well, one last thing. My aunt was a nurse, and she used to bring babies into the world. That was her thing. And in conversation one day, she let me know that out of all my mother's children, my mother had 7 children, all of them were born, natural head first. I came feet first.
Really?
And I was breech.
Any meanings?
I was born breech, and I look at that and I go, well, I came out ready to run. My feet were out. I'm ready to go, and I was, different,
Oh,
and
interesting.
I don't want to say it's symbolic, but it probably doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
I'm not the only baby that was ever born that way.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.